I never expected to be at war with my homeowners association, HOA, but when they falsely claimed my family farm was their public campsite and, unbelievably, started building facilities on my land, I had no choice but to fight back. What would you do if strangers were camping on your property and a corrupt HOA president with a judge for a husband was trying to steal your land? The irritating buzz of dirt bikes woke me at 7 a.m. sharp on Saturday morning. I jumped out of bed, instantly confused and angry. Who on earth would be riding on my property? I quickly grabbed my work boots and rushed outside, only to find 3 teenagers zipping across my north field, carelessly crushing the delicate winter wheat I'd planted just last fall. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms frantically. "This is private property. You need to leave right now." The kids stopped, looking genuinely confused. One pulled off his helmet and pointed towards a small, unfamiliar sign hammered into the ground at the edge of my field. It read, "Pinterest Gardens Community Recreation Area. Pinterest Gardens." "The HOA lady said we could ride here," the tallest boy explained, sounding slightly defiant. "She gave us permission yesterday." My blood began to boil as I strode over to inspect the sign. It was brand new, professionally made, and firmly planted in my soil. I'd inherited this 40-acre farm from my grandfather, who diligently worked this land since the 1940s, long before the fancy, sprawling Pinterest Gardens subdivision sprouted up next door just 5 years ago. "I don't care what the HOA lady told you," I retorted, trying to keep my voice even. "This is Harrison family property, and it has been for over 70 years. The boys exchanged uncertain glances, shrugged, and thankfully left without any further argument. With considerable effort, I yanked the offending sign out of the ground and marched back to my house, my mind already racing, ready to make some urgent phone calls. This wasn't the first time the Pinterest HOA had tried to push me around, but planting signs and actively sending people onto my land, that crossed a very serious line. I immediately dialed Mrs. Davenport, the formidable HOA president. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that turned instantly cold the moment I identified myself. "Mr. Harrison, what seems to be the problem now?" Her tone was thick with poorly concealed annoyance. "You put up signs on my land and told kids they could ride dirt bikes in my wheat field. That's the problem." "Oh dear," she sighed with exaggerated theatricality. "I think you're confused again, Mr. Harrison. That particular area is designated community recreational space according to our official master plan. Perhaps you should check your property deed more carefully." "My deed is perfectly clear, Mrs. Davenport. Your subdivision ends a full 50 yards before my Northfield even begins. You know this." She sighed again, even more dramatically this time. "Well, the board disagrees. We possess documentation clearly showing that parcel was officially rezoned years ago. I strongly suggest you speak with your lawyer before making such baseless accusations." And before I could utter another word, she abruptly hung up. I stood frozen in my kitchen, gripping my old coffee mug so tightly I thought the ceramic might shatter in my hand. My neighbor Brenda, truly the only friendly face I knew from the Pinterest Gardens development, had actually warned me this might happen. Apparently, the HOA had been greedily eyeing my land for potential expansion ever since their ambitious community pool project fell through last year due to funding issues. Consequently, I spent the rest of that frustrating Saturday meticulously checking my property boundaries, confirming the markers, and taking numerous photographs of the damaged wheat. The financial loss wasn't catastrophic, perhaps, but the blatant violation of my space, my family's heritage, left me feeling deeply unsettled and sick to my stomach. My late wife, Linda, had absolutely adored that field. She often said the sight of the golden wheat swaying against our blue mountain backdrop was the prettiest view in the entire valley. Sunday morning, however, brought even worse news. I woke to the unmistakable sound of voices, lots of them, drifting from the direction of the north field. Peering out my bedroom window, I spotted at least 20 people, complete with tents, large coolers, and all sorts of camping gear, spreading out across my field as if they owned it. To my utter disbelief and mounting horror, two men were casually unfolding a portable toilet right near my main irrigation access point. I hastily threw on some clothes and raced outside, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of calm, despite my heart pounding against my ribs. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching the closest group, a family busy unloading expensive-looking camping chairs from a high-end SUV. "I'm truly sorry, but you're currently on private property. This isn't a public campground." The father, decked out in pricey outdoor gear, looked at me with utter confusion. "But this is the Pinnerest Gardens community campsite. We reserved our spot weeks ago, directly through the HOA. "I'm James Harrison," I stated firmly. "This is my farm. There is no campsite here." Just then, a woman approached, holding a professionally printed map. "Look," she insisted. "It's right here on the official community map. The HOA sent this out with our reservation confirmation." She pointed emphatically to a clearly marked community campground located precisely on what was absolutely, unequivocally, my private property. More campers began to gather around as I tried patiently to explain the situation, but frustratingly, they all possessed the same map, the same misleading story. The HOA had assured them this was designated community land. "Look, I understand you were misled," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady and reasonable. "But please understand, this is my working farm, not HOA property. I'm going to have to ask everyone to please pack up your belongings and leave." "We paid good money for these reservations," someone shouted angrily from the back of the growing crowd. "That's an issue between you and the HOA," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "I strongly suggest you contact Mrs. Davenport directly for a full refund." As tensions inevitably rose, I noticed a sleek black Range Rover pull up slowly on the dusty access road. Mrs. Davenport herself stepped out, immaculately dressed in crisp white pants and a pastel blouse, looking remarkably fresh despite the early hour. She surveyed the chaotic scene with narrowed eyes before plastering on a wide artificial smile and approaching the group. "Good morning, everyone. Is there some sort of problem?" she inquired sweetly, deliberately ignoring my presence entirely. "This man says we're trespassing," the father from the SUV explained, gesturing towards me. Mrs. Davenport let out a light, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Mr. Harrison is simply a little confused about the precise property lines. This area has actually been designated community land for quite some time now." "That's an outright lie," I stated firmly, meeting her gaze. "Show me documentation where I ever agreed to give up my land." She turned to face me directly, her practiced smile never wavering for a second. "The agreement was signed back in 2008, Mr. Harrison. The board has all the necessary paperwork. Now, if you will kindly excuse me, these nice people have camping plans they'd like to enjoy. I never signed anything in 2008 or any other year for that matter," I insisted, my voice rising. Mrs. Davenport smoothly turned back to the assembled campers. "Please, everyone, enjoy your day. Mr. Harrison won't be causing any more trouble." She shot me a final, pointed warning look. Unless, of course, he wishes to discuss this matter further with our attorneys. As she walked away confidently, I felt completely trapped and overwhelmed. Just one man against a crowd of confused campers and a powerful HOA apparently armed with forged documents and legal threats. Defeated for the moment, I returned to my house and immediately called my lawyer, George Miller, leaving an urgent, detailed message. When I glanced out my kitchen window again, a few minutes later, the scene was even more infuriating. Children were now playing tag through my damaged wheat. Someone was energetically setting up a volleyball net near my fence line, and Mrs. Davenport was watching me intently from her Range Rover, a smug, satisfied smile playing on her lips. I grabbed my property file folder and my digital camera. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. How could they possibly think they'd get away with attempting to steal my land in broad daylight? Monday morning found me sitting anxiously in my lawyer's slightly cluttered office, pushing a thick stack of dated photographs across his wide desk. George Miller had been my family's trusted attorney for over 30 years, and frankly, I'd never seen him look quite so concerned. They actually installed a portable toilet on your property without any permission? George asked incredulously, carefully examining the pictures one by one. And they're actively telling people it's some sort of community campsite? And look at this, I added, showing him the professionally printed map a camper had given me. They've created official-looking documents that clearly show my entire Northfield as HOA property. George studied the map intently, his brow furrowed. This is deeply concerning, James, very concerning indeed. Furthermore, I explained, Mrs. Davenport claims I signed some sort of agreement back in 2008, granting them usage rights. George, I swear, I never signed anything like that. We absolutely need to see this supposed agreement immediately. George wasted no time, picking up his phone and dialing the HOA's legal representative, promptly putting the call on speakerphone. After George clearly explained the situation, my ownership, the trespassing, the lack of any agreement, the response from the other end chilled me to the bone. Yes, of course, we have the documentation on file. The HOA lawyer responded smoothly, his voice utterly confident. Mr. Harrison signed over recreational usage rights to that specific parcel years ago as part of a broader water access agreement. In fact, the HOA has been diligently paying the property taxes on that section since 2008. That's a blatant lie, I couldn't help but shout, but George quickly held up a hand, signaling for silence. We will require seeing that document today, George insisted calmly but firmly. Certainly, the lawyer replied easily. We have absolutely nothing to hide. We can arrange a formal meeting with the board for Wednesday evening. After the call ended, George turned to me, his expression serious. Okay, James, do not confront anyone further until Wednesday's meeting. Document absolutely everything you see, but do not escalate the situation. If, by some remote chance, they have actually been paying property taxes on that portion of your land, this could become significantly more complicated. They haven't, I insisted vehemently. I pay the property taxes on every single inch of my farm, just like my father and grandfather did before me. Good. Then we'll prove that conclusively. Bring all your tax records dating back at least 10 years to the meeting on Wednesday. Consequently, I spent the entirety of Tuesday buried deep in the county records office, meticulously gathering every single document related to my property deeds, taxes, and boundaries. The senior clerk, Mrs. Peters, had known my family for decades and kindly helped me navigate the complex system, searching through endless physical binders and digital archives. Something's definitely not right here, James, she murmured after several hours of painstaking work. There's a small notation here from 2009 referencing a boundary line adjustment, but astonishingly, the required supporting documentation is completely missing from the file. My stomach plummeted. Missing? How is that even possible? It absolutely should be attached directly to this file record. The computer system shows it was officially logged in, but the actual physical papers, They simply aren't here." She frowned, clearly perplexed. "That almost never happens." "Who requested access to this specific file last?" I asked, a dreadful suspicion forming in my mind. Mrs. Peters checked the access log on her computer. "Let's see. Judge Davenport's chief clerk requested it about a month ago." Judge Davenport, Mrs. Davenport's husband. The disparate pieces were rapidly starting to click into place, and the emerging picture they formed made me feel physically ill. Wednesday evening arrived under a sky filled with dark, threatening clouds that promised rain, disturbingly fitting weather for the inevitable confrontation ahead. The HOA meeting room, located in their small community clubhouse, was packed tight with residents, many of whom shot me cold, accusatory stares as I entered alongside George. Mrs. Davenport presided imperiously at the front table, flanked by 4 other board members, including the smug Mr. Davis, a retired banker whose property directly abutted my east field. I'd certainly had previous run-ins with Davis, primarily concerning his visiting grandchildren repeatedly letting their unruly dog chase my poor chickens. "We shall address the Harrison matter first," Mrs. Davenport announced loudly, her voice carrying easily across the tense, silent room. "Mr. Harrison claims that we have somehow encroached on his private property by establishing our vital community campsite. It's not merely a claim, it's an established fact," I stated firmly, refusing to be intimidated. Mrs. Davenport offered a thin, humorless smile. "Well then, let's review the actual facts, shall we?" With a flourish, she slid a single document across the polished table towards George. "This agreement, clearly signed by you, Mr. Harrison, in 2008, explicitly grants the Pinerest Gardens community recreational usage rights to the Northfield parcel in exchange for guaranteed water access across existing HOA property." George carefully picked up the paper while I leaned in close to look. There, at the bottom, was what initially appeared to be my signature. Except, upon closer inspection, it clearly wasn't. It was a passable imitation, perhaps, but definitely not mine. "That is absolutely not my signature," I declared loudly, causing the room to erupt in surprised whispers and murmurs. Mr. Davis crossed his arms defensively and scoffed audibly. "Are you actually accusing the elected board of forgery, Harrison? That's an extremely serious allegation. I'm stating a simple fact. I did not sign this document." George, meanwhile, was studying the document with a lawyer's keen eye. "Where is the required notary seal? Any agreement purporting to transfer property usage rights, even informally, would absolutely require proper notarization to have any legal standing." For the first time, Mrs. Davenport's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Well, it was a somewhat informal agreement reached at the time. The board simply maintained a record for our files. Informal agreements do not grant legally enforceable property rights, Mrs. Davenport," George replied coolly. "Furthermore, my client possesses verified tax records conclusively proving that he, and only he, has continuously paid all property taxes on that specific parcel of land year after year with absolutely no contribution whatsoever from the HOA. I pulled out my thick folder of tax documents, but Mrs. Davenport barely even glanced at them. "The arrangement," she insisted, her voice regaining some confidence, "was that Mr. Harrison would graciously continue paying the property taxes while the HOA maintained the usage rights. It's all quite standard procedure." "There is absolutely nothing standard about this situation," I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "You are deliberately trying to steal my family's land." Mr. Davis abruptly stood up, leaning over the table slightly. "Now see here, Harrison, no one is stealing anything. This growing community desperately needs adequate recreational space for our children and families. Your largely unused field is absolutely perfect for our needs. Why must you be so consistently difficult about this? Because it's my field, I finally shouted, my carefully controlled temper snapping. I grow winter wheat there. I have other plans for that land, plans that don't involve your HOA. At that moment, an older woman, seated near the back, slowly raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I've lived in this area since long before Pineresque Gardens was even built. That north field has always belonged to the Harrison farm." Mrs. Davenport shot the woman an icy glare. "Mrs. Chen, unless you have official documentation to present to the board right now, personal recollections, however well-intentioned, are unfortunately not relevant to this discussion." As the meeting rapidly devolved into shouting and unproductive arguing, I happened to spot my neighbor Brenda quietly slipping into the room near the back entrance. She caught my eye across the chaos and subtly motioned with her head towards the hallway door. Fortunately, George noticed it too. "Perhaps we should take a brief 5-minute recess," he suggested loudly, cutting through the noise. Outside, in the relative quiet of the hallway, Brenda quickly pulled me aside, her expression urgent. "James, you absolutely need to know what's really happening here. They're not just after your field for simple camping." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I overheard Mrs. Davenport talking on the phone with a big-shot developer just last week," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "They're secretly planning to build a whole complex of luxury glamping cabins back there and then charge residents exorbitant premium fees to use them. That's the real reason they're pushing this so incredibly hard." A cold dread washed over me. They weren't just trespassing. They were actively planning to commercialize my private property for their own profit. Brenda nodded grimly. "And there's more. Judge Davenport has apparently been pulling strings behind the scenes, using his judicial connections to fast-track necessary permits and approvals." George, who had quietly joined us and been listening intently, slowly shook his head. "That constitutes a serious, potentially actionable conflict of interest." "Brenda, why are you telling me all this?" I asked, genuinely concerned for her. "Won't revealing this get you into serious trouble with the HOA leadership?" She offered a sad, weary smile. "Honestly, James, they've already made living here completely miserable for anyone who doesn't blindly follow their arbitrary rules down to the letter. Just last month, they fined the poor Miller family $500 because their lawn was supposedly half an inch too tall while they were away attending a relative's funeral." As we walked back into the increasingly hostile meeting room, I felt a surge of new determination harden within me. This fight wasn't just about protecting my field anymore. It was about standing up to arrogant bullies who were systematically making life unbearable for an entire community. Mrs. Davenport promptly resumed the meeting with a formal announcement. "The board has officially voted to move forward immediately with our community recreation development plan for the Northfield parcel. If Mr. Harrison continues to interfere with this board-approved project, we will unfortunately be forced to seek a legal injunction against him." "On what possible legal grounds?" George immediately demanded. "On the grounds that his ongoing interference is actively disrupting a vital community service that, for all intents and purposes, has been effectively established for years," she replied, directing a cold, triumphant smile straight at me. "Furthermore, Judge Davenport has already reviewed the basic facts of the case informally and apparently sees no significant legal issue with our position or our plans." A stunned silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed the full, chilling implications of her statement. A sitting judge, her own husband, had already informally reviewed a contentious case directly involving his wife's HOA. As the meeting finally adjourned, I watched the residents file out silently, many pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. However, Mr. Davis made a point to approach me, deliberately standing uncomfortably close. "You're fighting a losing battle here, Harrison," he muttered menacingly under his breath. "Just so you know, this upcoming weekend is our big annual summer barbecue, and it's happening right there, in the campsite area, whether you like it or not. Hundreds of people will be attending, including influential county officials. Do yourself a huge favor and just stay away." As Davis turned and walked off smugly, Brenda quickly touched my arm. "Their high-powered lawyers will absolutely destroy you, James," she whispered urgently. "Please be incredibly careful." Walking slowly home, through the encroaching darkness, my mind was a whirlwind of frantic possibilities and desperate strategies. I knew I had to find some way, any way, to definitively prove my ownership and expose their scheme before the upcoming weekend barbecue. As I approached the familiar silhouette of my farmhouse, I noticed something horrifyingly new at the edge of my north field. Several workmen were actively installing a permanent-looking bathroom facility. Their harsh floodlights cut through the night, illuminating the area as they worked relentlessly. They were actually constructing permanent structures on my land now. Without a second thought, I pulled out my smartphone and began documenting everything, my hands shaking uncontrollably with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Suddenly, bright headlights flared up behind me. A large vehicle approached slowly, finally stopping just inches from where I stood, frozen. The driver's side window glided down silently, revealing Mrs. Davenport's perfectly composed, almost serene face, eerily illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Trespassing late at night, Mr. Harrison?" she inquired coolly. "That's not very neighborly behavior now, is it?" "It is you who are trespassing, Mrs. Davenport," I shot back, instinctively holding up my phone. "And just so you know, I'm recording this entire conversation. This is my private property, and I have all the legal papers necessary to prove it." She let out a short, sharp laugh, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine, despite the warm night air. "Your property ends at the creek bed, Mr. Harrison. I suggest you check the official county records again. And I'd strongly advise you delete that recording immediately if you know what's good for you." With that veiled threat hanging in the air, the Range Rover accelerated rapidly, peeling away into the darkness, leaving me standing alone, trembling with a potent cocktail of unanswered questions and simmering anger. Sleep was utterly impossible that night. My grandfather's resolute voice seemed to echo in my ears. "This land feeds the family, Jimmy. Always protect it. Protect it with everything you've got." Fueled by adrenaline and determination, I retrieved the heavy old wooden chest from the attic, where generations of Harrisons had stored important family papers. Inside, nestled among other documents, was the original deed to the farm, its paper yellowed and brittle with age, but the boundaries described in ink still crystal clear. My land unequivocally stretched a full quarter-mile beyond the aforementioned creek. At the crack of dawn, I drove straight back to the county clerk's office. Ms. Johnson, the kind clerk who'd worked there for what seemed like forever, greeted me with visible concern etched on her face. "Jimmy Harrison? Goodness, you look like you haven't slept a wink all night." "Ms. Johnson, the HOA next door is claiming my Northfield isn't actually mine. I desperately need to see all the official records pertaining to my property boundaries." Her expression fell noticeably. "Oh dear. You're the third local farmer just this year dealing with boundary disputes involving that development. Let me pull everything we have on file for your parcels." For the next 6 grueling hours, I meticulously pored through dusty ledgers, oversized plat maps, and endless computer files. What I eventually uncovered made my blood run cold. The official county property maps had indeed been altered, precisely 3 years ago. A tiny, almost hidden notation indicated a boundary adjustment per Municipal Code 47.3. However, when I asked Ms. Johnson about the specifics of Municipal Code 47.3, she searched diligently but couldn't find any such code listed anywhere in the county's official books. "Something is seriously wrong here, Jimmy," she whispered, instinctively glancing around the now empty public office. These types of boundary changes legally require public hearings, official notifications sent to all affected property owners. Did you ever receive any letters or notices about a proposed boundary change? Absolutely not, not a single one. She navigated to another screen on her computer terminal. Let's see who accessed these specific property records right before that change was logged. She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening slightly. Who was it, Miss Johnson? I pressed urgently. Well, I probably shouldn't say. She hesitated. But perhaps you should check who was elected to the position of County Records Administrator exactly 3 years ago. A quick search on my smartphone provided the sickening answer almost immediately. Judge Harold Davenport. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely grip the phone. The pieces were all falling rapidly into place. Judge Davenport, as County Records Administrator, had possessed the access and authority needed to alter official records. His wife, Mrs. Davenport, ran the HOA that suddenly, conveniently claimed ownership of the very land affected by that alteration. But in their arrogance, they appeared to have made one colossal, potentially fatal mistake. Back in the sanctuary of my own home, I carefully pulled out Grandpa's detailed irrigation maps. Critically, the water rights associated with the creek that bordered my property and flowed through the disputed North Field were documented entirely separately from the land deeds. I unequivocally owned those water rights clear as day, and the entire complex irrigation system that fed water to the area the HOA was now calling a campsite originated and ran directly through my legally undisputed wetlands property. Standing there in my quiet kitchen, looking at the faded maps spread out across the old wooden table, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. They might possess wealth, connections, and political power, but I possessed the truth, the documented history, and hopefully the law on my side. Just then, my phone buzzed insistently. It was a text message from Brenda. "Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow. They're voting to sue you formally. Need to talk now." I met her discreetly at the far edge of my property line, well away from any potentially prying eyes or listening ears. Brenda looked visibly nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder as she spoke. "Jimmy, it's gotten even worse than we thought. Mrs. Davenport brought in some high-powered special legal consultant to the last closed board meeting. They're planning to formally claim adverse possession of your field." "Adverse possession? What in the world is that?" "Basically," she explained quickly, "it's a legal principle where if someone uses your land openly, notoriously, and continuously for a specific period of time, usually several years, without you successfully stopping them, they can actually petition the court to claim legal ownership of it. They're preparing to argue that the HOA has been actively maintaining that area for years now. That's an absolute fabrication. I've been actively farming that land, planting and harvesting every single season. I know that, Jimmy, and you know that. But listen, they've apparently gathered photographs supposedly showing HOA-hired landscapers working in that area. They're claiming this goes back at least 5 years. The photos are almost certainly doctored or taken completely out of context. But who's going to question them rigorously, especially with Judge Davenport potentially influencing things from behind the scenes? As we talked, a steady rain began to fall, quickly soaking through my thin jacket. Brenda huddled closer under her small umbrella. "And there's more," she added grimly. They are definitely still planning that big community celebration on the campsite this weekend. It's clearly intended as a public show of force, a way to visibly establish and normalize their claim in front of everyone. Frustrated, I kicked hard at the muddy ground, watching rainwater begin to pool around my worn boots. Water. Suddenly, the idea that had been vaguely forming in the back of my mind hit me with the force of a lightning strike. "Brenda," I asked abruptly, "who actually approved the plumbing permits for that permanent bathroom facility they just built?" She thought for a moment, brow furrowed. "Well, the county building inspector, I would guess. Why do you ask?" "Because," I said slowly, a plan starting to crystallize, "that bathroom almost certainly drains directly into my protected wetlands. And according to these documents, I control the water rights and the primary water flow through that entire area." Her eyes widened in sudden understanding. "Jimmy, what exactly are you thinking of doing?" I stared intently across my rain-swept land, towards the spot where unwelcome strangers now camped freely, where an illegal structure now stood. "I'm not entirely sure yet, Brenda," I admitted truthfully, "but I can promise you this. They picked the wrong damn farmer to mess with." That same evening, armed with a powerful flashlight, I found myself crawling through the damp, musty space underneath my old farmhouse, carefully studying the faded, intricate plumbing diagrams my grandfather had drawn by hand decades ago. Just as I suspected, the main irrigation channels that delivered water to the North Field, the area the HOA brazenly called their campsite, could indeed be selectively redirected with a few precise turns of several key water valves. Critically, all of these crucial valves were located squarely on my legally undisputed property, far from the contested boundary line. As darkness completely enveloped the farm, I walked the perimeter of my land yet again, methodically marking each important valve location with small, discrete, colored flags. A risky but potentially effective plan was solidifying in my mind, but I needed just a bit more technical information to be certain. I decided to call my old friend Mike, who worked down at the Regional Water District office. "Hey Mike," I began, trying to sound casual, "I need to understand exactly how the natural drainage patterns work up on my north field, near the creek." "Whoa, be careful up there, Jimmy," Mike responded immediately. "That whole area is designated natural wetlands, environmentally sensitive. Anything that significantly disrupts the established water flow could cause some serious problems." "What kind of problems are we talking about?" I pressed. "Well," he explained, "let's just say water always finds its way downhill eventually. And when it gets backed up or redirected unnaturally, it tends to take everything else along with it." I was about to thank him for the information and hang up when he added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, by the way, funny you should call about that area. I actually got a call from someone at the county administration office earlier today, asking some pointed questions about your specific water rights for that creek section. Seemed like someone's suddenly very interested in them right now." My stomach instantly dropped. "Who called, Mike? Did they leave a name?" "No name," he replied, "but the internal request definitely originated from Judge Davenport's office. They were moving incredibly fast, trying to cover all their bases. I realized I needed to move even faster." The very next morning, my newly hired lawyer, Olivia Garcia, called, her voice noticeably tight with tension. "Jimmy, I've got bad news. Judge Davenport just denied our request for an emergency injunction to halt the trespassing and construction. For now, the camping continues, and even worse, they're actively fast-tracking the adverse possession claim hearing." "How is that even legally possible?" I asked, incredulous. "He's married to the damn HOA president. That's a textbook conflict of interest." He absolutely should have recused himself from this case entirely. You're absolutely right, he should have, Olivia agreed grimly. But realistically, in this particular county, with his influence, who's going to officially challenge him on it right now? Frustrated and angry, I watched through my kitchen window as even more cars pulled up onto the access road leading to my north field. People were unloading coolers, grills, and brightly colored folding chairs. Children laughed and ran freely across the land that had belonged to my family, been nurtured by my family for generations. So what do we do now? I asked Olivia, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. We file an immediate appeal of his ruling, of course, she stated firmly. But appeals take time, Jimmy. Meanwhile, they're deliberately strengthening their adverse possession claim every single day they continue to openly use that land. After hanging up the phone, I slumped down at my worn kitchen table, burying my head in my hands. Grandpa's practical words echoed in my memory again. Sometimes, Jimmy, a farmer has to work with nature, not against it, to solve the toughest problems. As if on cue, outside my window, the sky darkened ominously, and thick clouds began to gather speed. A serious storm was definitely brewing, and suddenly I knew exactly how I was going to use it. Just then, lightning flashed brilliantly across the sky, followed almost immediately by a loud clap of thunder. Seconds later, Brenda burst into my kitchen, her hair plastered to her head by the sudden downpour, raindrops glistening on her face. She slammed a thin manila folder down hard on the table. "They're actually planning to bulldoze your winter wheat crop next week, Jimmy," she exclaimed, breathing heavily. "I managed to sneak these papers off Mrs. Davenport's printer while I was cleaning." I quickly flipped through the documents inside. They were detailed construction plans, boldly labeled Pine Rest Gardens, exclusive luxury glamping experience. My stomach twisted into a tight knot as I saw the intricate architectural drawings depicting my entire north field completely transformed into a series of raised wooden platforms, fancy prefabricated camping structures, and even private stone fire pits. "How on earth did you get these, Brenda?" Brenda's eyes darted nervously towards the rain-lashed window. "Like I said, I clean Mrs. Davenport's house on Tuesdays. She just carelessly left them sitting out on her desk." "Jimmy, listen. There's more you need to know. According to these notes, they've already pre-sold dozens of expensive memberships for this thing. Apparently, rich folks from the city have already paid thousands of dollars each for exclusive curated nature experiences scheduled to begin next month." The rain hammered relentlessly against the roof as we spread the damning papers across my kitchen table. There it was, starkly outlined in black and white, a complete, calculated plan to steal my family's land, and then shamelessly profit from it. "Brenda," I asked again, more seriously this time, looking her directly in the eye, "why are you helping me like this? You're risking an awful lot." Brenda's face hardened with remembered pain. "My own grandparents lost their small family farm to similar kinds of deceitful legal tricks nearly 20 years ago," she said, quietly but fiercely. "They both died heartbroken not long after. I refused to just stand by and watch it happen again to another decent farming family." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed loudly with an incoming weather alert. Flash flood warning now in effect for the entire county. I walked slowly to the window and watched as rainwater was already beginning to pool significantly in the lower parts of my yard. "Brenda," I asked thoughtfully, turning back to her, "have you actually seen Judge Davenport's signature on any of these planning documents?" "No," she admitted. "He's far too careful for that. Mrs. Davenport handles all the public-facing stuff, but look closely at this." She pointed to a set of tiny, almost illegible initials scribbled at the bottom corner of each planning page AG reviewed. "We need more concrete proof," I said, thinking aloud, "something that directly and undeniably connects him to the fraudulent aspects of this whole scheme." Brenda nodded in agreement. "Well, don't forget, the big HOA summer barbecue is still scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. They're definitely still having it, rain or shine. In fact, Mrs. Davenport already rented several huge party tents to put up. To put up on the campsite? On my land?" I clarified, incredulous. "Yes, and get this. She's apparently invited several county commissioners, influential local business leaders, and even managed to get a reporter from the local newspaper to attend and cover the celebration." I felt the final pieces of my risky plan click firmly into place. "What time exactly does it start?" "The invitation said 3 p.m., Brenda replied, "and Mrs. Davenport is scheduled to give her big welcome speech around 4 p.m. Why?" "Jimmy, what exactly are you thinking?" I walked over to my grandfather's sturdy old oak desk in the corner and carefully pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. "These," I explained, opening it carefully, "are all the original irrigation system plans for this farm. Decades ago, my grandfather designed a clever system that naturally filtered runoff water through the existing wetlands before it ever reached the main creek." Brenda still looked confused. "Okay, but how does that help us now?" "Think about it," I explained patiently. "When they illegally built that permanent bathroom facility back there, they almost certainly just hooked it directly into my existing irrigation drainage system without any permission, without any proper permits. Those pipes absolutely have to cross through the legally undisputed part of my property before they reach the contested North Field area." Understanding finally dawned brightly on her face. "So, wait, you actually control the water flow to that whole area?" "Exactly," I confirmed, glancing meaningfully out the window at the increasingly heavy rainfall. "Oh my God, Jimmy," she whispered, her eyes wide. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I showed her the relevant pages in Grandpa's journal. "Don't worry, Brenda," I reassured her. "I'm not going to do anything illegal, like actively pumping sewage. I'm simply going to restore the farm's original intended water flow patterns by disconnecting their unauthorized plumbing hookup from my private system." And what will happen then?" she asked nervously. I met her gaze steadily. "Then, nature will simply take its inevitable course. After all," I added with a grim smile, "water always flows downhill." The following morning brought even heavier, more relentless rain. Peering through my kitchen window, I could see drenched workers struggling miserably to erect the large party tents in the muddy expanse of my north field. Mrs. Davenport supervised the proceedings intermittently, from the dry comfort of her Range Rover, occasionally rolling down the window, just enough to shout sharp orders at the struggling crew. Resolutely, I pulled on my heaviest raincoat and sturdy rubber boots and headed out towards the old barn. Hidden away behind towering stacks of dusty hay bales was the farm's original irrigation control panel. Grandfather had installed it himself decades ago. A relatively simple but effective system of heavy metal levers and brass valves that could precisely direct the flow of water across different sections of the farm as needed for crops. For a solid hour, I carefully studied the faded diagrams taped inside the panel's cover, double-checking and triple-checking my understanding of exactly what sequence of actions would produce the desired effect. To be clear, I wasn't planning to actively pump or redirect sewage anywhere. That would be grossly illegal and environmentally irresponsible. I was simply going to disconnect the plumbing pipes that the HOA had installed illegally and without permission, pipes that never should have been connected to my private irrigation system in the first place. Precisely at noon, under the cover of the driving rain, I made my move. 3 specific valves needed careful adjustment. The first 2 were easily accessible, located right there, inside the relative dryness of the barn. The third, however, required me to crawl on my belly through thick mud underneath the old, rusted equipment shed to reach its recessed access point. Cold mud soaked quickly through my clothes as I strained to turn the stiff, rusted valve handle with a heavy pipe wrench. As I finally emerged, muddy but successful, I happened to spot Mr. Davis standing at the edge of his own property, watching me intently from under a large golf umbrella. Our eyes met briefly across the rain-swept field. I could tell he sensed something unusual was happening, but he clearly wasn't sure exactly what. By 2:00 p.m., despite the atrocious weather, cars began arriving for the barbecue. Somehow, the workers had managed to fully erect the party tents, though significant puddles of water were already forming underneath them on the saturated ground. A large catering truck carefully backed up near the illegal bathroom building, which, I noted grimly, was now apparently serving as a makeshift food preparation and staging area. I continued to watch the scene unfold through a pair of powerful binoculars from the vantage point of my upstairs bedroom window. The final crucial piece of my plan relied entirely on the storm continuing unabated. As if answering my silent prayer, another loud rumble of thunder echoed overhead, and the already heavy rain seemed to intensify even further. At exactly 3 p.m., the barbecue officially commenced. Despite the miserable weather, a surprising number of people, I counted at least 50, were huddled together under the relative shelter of the large tents. Mrs. Davenport, looking remarkably radiant and unfazed in a bright red dress and pristine white cardigan, moved effortlessly from group to group, laughing, shaking hands, and making introductions. Then, through to my binoculars, I noticed something distinctly odd. The ground immediately surrounding the illegal bathroom building had begun to darken considerably, looking unnaturally soggy. Water was visibly starting to back up around its base. Just as I had calculated, the original, natural drainage patterns of the land, now fully restored by my valve adjustments, simply couldn't handle the combined onslaught of the torrential rain and the unexpected concentrated wastewater output from the heavily used plumbing fixture. My phone suddenly rang. It was Brenda, her voice urgent. "Jimmy, are you seeing this? The ground over by the tents is getting really soggy. It's like a marsh." "I'm watching, Brenda. Keep me posted." "Okay." Oh my God. Mrs. Davenport just stepped right into a huge mud puddle and got muck all over her expensive white shoes. She looks absolutely furious. Now she's yelling at the poor catering company staff, blaming them. I almost felt a pang of sympathy for the bewildered catering crew. Almost. At precisely 10 minutes to 4 p.m., Mrs. Davenport confidently took the small, makeshift stage that had been set up at one end of the main tent. The crowd gathered closer, straining to hear her remarks over the incessant pounding of the rain on the canvas roof. "Friends, neighbors, esteemed guests," she began, her voice amplified slightly by a portable speaker system. Welcome to the first annual Pinterest Gardens Summer Celebration. This truly beautiful community space," she gestured expansively, "represents our shared vision for the future, a future of growth and prosperity for—" She never finished that sentence. A collective gasp, quickly followed by murmurs of disgust and alarm, rippled through the crowd as the first few people looked down and realized exactly what they were standing in. The backed-up water from the overwhelmed drainage system had inevitably mixed with the raw effluent overflowing from the improperly installed, now overloaded portable toilet's holding tank, creating a foul-smelling, sludgy mess that was rapidly spreading across the entire grassy area underneath the tents. Chaos erupted instantly, People scrambled desperately towards the edges of the tents, seeking higher, drier ground. Expensive shoes were irrevocably ruined. Several children started crying loudly, and abandoned food carts listed precariously in the spreading mire. Mrs. Davenport stood frozen on the stage, her face a mask of utter disbelief, transitioning rapidly into pure, unadulterated rage. And that's precisely when the local newspaper photographer, who had been invited specifically to capture images of the prestigious community event, started snapping pictures furiously, documenting the entire unfolding fiasco. Perfect, impeccable timing. Sheriff Miller arrived on the scene approximately 20 minutes later, summoned by multiple frantic 911 calls. By then, Mrs. Davenport was practically screaming about deliberate sabotage, pointing an accusing, mud-stained finger directly towards my house. The sheriff, looking thoroughly exasperated and unhappy, trudged slowly through the stinking mess towards my front door. "Mr. Harrison," he said wearily, when I opened the door, his uniform already splattered with mud, "Mrs. Davenport is making some pretty serious claims out here. She's alleging that you've somehow deliberately flooded this entire community area with raw sewage." I calmly invited him inside, out of the driving rain, and carefully spread my grandfather's old journals and detailed irrigation maps out on the kitchen table. "Sheriff," I explained calmly and clearly, "I simply restored the original, documented water flow patterns on my own legally owned property earlier today. The HOA, as you can see from these diagrams, illegally connected their new plumbing directly into my pre-existing irrigation system without any permission or permits. Here are the original farm irrigation designs, and here is my official water rights documentation for the creek and wetlands. The heavy storm," I concluded, gesturing towards the window, "unfortunately did the rest." He studied the papers intently for several long minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This ongoing property dispute has clearly been going on far too long," he sighed. "But Mrs. Davenport insists this land now officially belongs to the HOA. Sheriff," I asked pointedly, "has anyone involved in this, including yourself, actually seen the supposed legal documents that prove that claim? Because I have the original recorded deed to this entire farm, dating back to my grandfather's purchase, right here." I carefully pulled the fragile, yellowed paper out from my grandfather's heavy wooden chest. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Well, Judge Davenport did officially sign off on the boundary change paperwork a few years back," he admitted hesitantly. "And yes, his wife currently runs the HOA that directly benefits from that specific boundary change. Sheriff, isn't that a rather blatant conflict of interest?" Before Sheriff Miller could formulate a response, his police radio crackled loudly to life. Dispatch informed him that the county environmental health inspector had just arrived at the disastrous barbecue site and was urgently requesting his presence. Nearly an hour later, the sheriff returned to my house. His entire expression, his entire demeanor, had changed completely. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice now firm and official, "the environmental inspector found multiple serious code violations associated with that bathroom facility installation. Apparently, there were no proper permits pulled. And even worse, there's clear evidence of improper sewage disposal directly into a protected wetlands area. There's going to be a full, formal investigation launched immediately." A profound wave of relief washed over me, feeling stronger and more cleansing than the torrential rain still pouring down outside. As Sheriff Miller finally turned to leave, however, I noticed Mr. Davis brazenly taking photographs of me from inside his car, which was parked just across the street. His face was contorted with pure, unadulterated fury. This ugly situation wasn't completely over yet, not by a long shot. But for the very first time since this whole nightmare began, I genuinely felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes, I reflected, justice truly does flow like water, inexorably finding every hidden crack in the elaborate dams of lies people build, eventually washing them all away when you least expect it. My hands still shook slightly as I reread the bold headline on the front page of the county newspaper. Environmental investigation launched following disastrous HOA event at Pinarest Gardens. It felt significant, like the first noticeable crack appearing in the formidable dam the Davenports and their allies had constructed. But I knew instinctively the flood of consequences was far from over. Predictably, just 3 days after the now infamous sewage disaster, the threatened lawsuit hit me with the force of a physical blow. Mrs. Davenport's impeccably dressed lawyer delivered the thick packet personally, a smug smirk playing on his lips as I reluctantly signed for the certified envelope. Inside was a veritable novel of dense legal language, essentially accusing me of everything short of intentionally conjuring the storm itself. Unbelievably, they were suing me for a staggering $2 million, claiming damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress and significant harm to their precious community property. My stomach immediately twisted itself into painful knots. Making matters significantly worse, as I frantically called attorneys listed in the local directory, the first 4 flat out refused to even consider taking my case the moment they heard Judge Davenport's powerful name was involved on the opposing side. Finally, the 5th lawyer I contacted, a sharp, energetic young woman named Olivia Garcia, whose small office was located rather unassumingly above the downtown hardware store, agreed to meet with me. "They're clearly banking on you getting scared and giving up," Olivia stated bluntly after scanning the voluminous lawsuit with impressive speed and focus. "They possess considerable money, political influence, and they obviously think they can bully you into submission. But James," she added, leaning forward slightly, "they also made mistakes, potentially very big ones." She pointed decisively to a specific paragraph detailing the property lines. "They're basing their entire claim on this alleged deed modification from 2008, the one you supposedly signed." "I absolutely never signed it," I insisted vehemently. "I have never, ever signed any document giving away even a single square inch of my family's land." A spark of determination flashed in Olivia Garcia's eyes. "Excellent. Then our primary defense focuses squarely on proving fraud. We just need solid, irrefutable proof connecting them directly to the forgery." That crucial proof arrived in a completely unexpected manner later that very afternoon. My doorbell rang insistently. When I opened it, I found Brenda standing there, accompanied by a nervous-looking woman I didn't recognize. "James, this is Karen," Brenda said quickly, ushering the woman inside. Karen used to work as Mrs. Davenport's personal administrative assistant at the HOA office. "She has something important she thinks you need to see." Karen's hands trembled visibly as she carefully placed a small USB flash drive onto my worn kitchen table. Mrs. Davenport made me scan and digitize all the HOA's official documents when I first started working there 4 years ago, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That included files she explicitly told me were private board matters that I should never, ever mention to anyone. With bated breath, we plugged the small drive into my laptop. It contained a treasure trove of digital files, years' worth of internal emails exchanged between Mrs. Davenport and her husband, Judge Davenport, meticulously discussing, in coded but clear language, their long-term strategy to acquire my valuable Northfield property for future lucrative development. One particularly damning email from Judge Davenport read, "Regarding The Harrison parcel signature, no one will likely check it too closely. Just ensure the property description precisely matches the revised plat maps we need for the zoning change application later down the line. I stared at the screen, utterly stunned. This is actual tangible evidence of deliberate forgery and criminal conspiracy. Karen nodded somberly. They fired me abruptly last month, right after I started asking questions about a questionable invoice related to the installation of that new bathroom facility. Mrs. Davenport just said I was being disloyal and not a team player. The very next day, drawn by Sheriff Miller's official incident report and the rapidly escalating local news coverage surrounding the disastrous barbecue, investigators from the State Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, arrived at my farm. They spent hours taking detailed soil and water samples from my protected wetlands area. Their preliminary findings confirmed precisely what I had suspected all along. Dangerous levels of chemicals, consistent with untreated sewage discharge, had been actively leaching into the sensitive ecosystem for months, likely ever since the HOA had illegally installed the bathroom facility. This pollution had already resulted in documented harm, killing fish and native frogs. When the EPA investigators conclusively traced the source of the contamination directly back to the improperly installed pipes originating from the HOA's structure, pipes installed without any permits, the story exploded, making headlines not just locally, but regionally. HOA accused of serious environmental violations. Document fraud allegations surfaced and screamed the banner headline in the largest nearby city's newspaper. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters representing various news outlets. In a move that surprised no one paying attention, Judge Davenport hastily announced he was immediately recusing himself from presiding over all pending property cases in the county, citing vague, unforeseen personal matters. Simultaneously, Mrs. Davenport's usually hyperactive social media accounts went completely dark and silent. However, the real earthquake that shattered the Davenports' carefully constructed facade of respectability occurred during a hastily called emergency community meeting. The remaining HOA board members had convened it ostensibly to address the recent regrettable events and outline a path forward. I decided I had to attend, steeling myself as I walked in and sat near the back, acutely feeling every hostile stare and hushed, accusatory whisper directed my way. Mrs. Davenport stood nervously at the front, her voice attempting its familiar honeyed sweetness as she tried to explain how a series of unfortunate miscommunications and administrative oversights had somehow led to the understandable misunderstandings regarding both the Northfield property and the disastrous barbecue. That's precisely when Mrs. Chen, the elderly resident who had bravely spoken up for me at the previous meeting and who I later learned had served on the HOA board years ago before retiring to a condo, slowly stood up, clutching a thick, worn leather portfolio. "I kept meticulous copies of everything," she announced, her voice trembling slightly but resonating with quiet determination throughout the suddenly silent room. Every single meeting where we, the board, were pressured to approve expensive projects without proper documentation or independent review. Every single time Mrs. Davenport demonstrably altered official meeting minutes after we had already signed off on them. Every single questionable dollar spent on exorbitant consulting fees paid to companies secretly owned by her own brother-in-law. The room instantly erupted. People jumped to their feet, shouting angry questions and long suppressed accusations. Mr. Davis, looking pale and flustered, attempted to bang a small gavel and restore order, but his authority had completely evaporated in the face of the residents' collective outrage. My sister had to fill in her beautiful koi pond because Mrs. Davenport arbitrarily decided it violated some obscure HOA rule, one distraught woman yelled out. Then lo and behold, Mrs. Davenport built the exact same type of pond in her own backyard just the very next month. They fined me $500 for parking my registered work truck in my own driveway overnight when my elderly mother was critically ill in the hospital, shouted another furious man, shaking his fist. Years, possibly decades, of simmering resentment, fueled by countless petty tyrannies and perceived injustices, poured out like raging floodwaters, finally breaking through a weakened dam. Over the course of the next several weeks, as the official county and state investigations deepened and gathered momentum, a palpable shift began to occur in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had previously avoided me started stopping by my farm again. Some offered quiet, sometimes awkward apologies for their earlier assumptions. Others brought freshly baked pies and comforting casseroles, traditional symbols of rural community support. Many shared their own previously suppressed stories of experiencing HOA bullying, arbitrary fines, and blatantly selective rule enforcement under the long reign of the Davenport regime. Ultimately, following a thorough review of the overwhelming evidence presented by my lawyer, Olivia Garcia, including the crucial contents of Karen's USB drive and the meticulous records provided by Mrs. Chen, the county land office officially restored my original property lines, formally nullifying the fraudulent 2009 boundary adjustment. Shortly thereafter, Mrs. Davenport and Judge Davenport quietly put their ostentatious house up for sale and, according to persistent local rumors, relocated hastily to somewhere in Florida. Mr. Davis abruptly resigned from the HOA board, publicly citing vague, pressing health concerns. Brenda, ever the community organizer, took the initiative to arrange a new kind of community meeting. Held this time in the neutral space of the town's public library, the explicitly stated focus was on healing the fractured neighborhood and fundamentally reforming the HOA's structure and governance. To my surprise, more than 50 residents attended, filling the small room with a palpable mixture of cautious optimism and lingering, understandable anger. During the open discussion period, someone tentatively suggested, what if we created a real community garden space somewhere? You know, with a proper lease agreement, clear rules, and actual permits? Several heads immediately turned to look expectantly towards me. I took a slow, deep breath, thinking about my grandfather and his deeply held belief that good farmland should primarily serve to feed and nourish communities, not just line the pockets of opportunistic developers. I might be willing to lease out about an acre, I said slowly, carefully considering my words as I looked around the room at the hopeful faces. Perhaps a corner section, furthest away from the protected wetlands, but only, I added firmly, with a legally sound contract, mutually agreed upon rules, and a shared commitment to respecting the land. The following spring, with Brenda energetically coordinating the effort, a proper lease agreement was drawn up and signed. Soon after, numerous families from Pinterest gardens were busy planting vegetables, herbs, and flowers in neatly marked plots on the designated acre of my farm. Children laughed as they learned firsthand about growing food, their joyful sounds replacing the jarring drone of dirt bikes that had once disturbed the peace. The newly elected HOA board, now led by the fair-minded and meticulous Mrs. Chen, established transparent operational rules and fair, consistently applied enforcement procedures, posting all relevant documents publicly on a new community website. The day the heavy backhoes finally arrived on my property, not to build, but to carefully remove the illegal bathroom facility and begin the necessary environmental remediation work in the damaged wetland area, all costs covered by a substantial legal settlement extracted from the Davenport's remaining known assets and the HOA's liability insurance. I watched the process unfold from my familiar spot on the front porch, experiencing a complex mixture of emotions. The various legal battles weren't entirely concluded yet. Olivia Garcia was still vigorously pursuing damages for my lost crops and the initial trespass violations. But the parallel criminal investigation into document fraud and conspiracy had reportedly resulted in both Mrs. Davenport and her husband negotiating plea deals to avoid the potential embarrassment and risk of lengthy public trials. Brenda brought me a steaming mug of hot apple cider, freshly pressed from apples grown right there in my own orchard, and sat down beside me on the weathered porch swing. "You know, James," she said quietly after a comfortable silence, "you really could have just given up early on. Most people probably would have folded under that kind of intense pressure and intimidation." I sipped the sweet, comforting cider, my gaze drifting towards the thriving community garden space where a small group of children were now being patiently taught how to plant delicate tomato seedlings by Mrs. Chen herself. "You know, Brenda," I realized aloud, perhaps articulating the thought clearly for the very first time, ultimately, it wasn't just about protecting the land itself. It was about standing up to arrogant bullies who genuinely believed the rules simply didn't apply to them. People who thought they could just take whatever they wanted through lies and manipulation. The infamous sewage incident certainly hadn't been my proudest moment, admittedly a messy, almost visceral consequence of restoring the natural order against an unnatural and illegal intrusion. But sometimes, I mused, watching the vibrant new life taking root in the now properly cared-for soil of the community garden. Sometimes you simply have to be willing to get your hands dirty, maybe even stir things up significantly in order to finally grow something genuinely good and lasting. This story serves as a powerful reminder that diligently standing up for your rights and your heritage, even when facing powerful, well-connected, and seemingly untouchable opponents, is not just important, but often essential. Corruption, abuse of power, and bullying tend to thrive in environments of silence, fear, and apathy. By patiently gathering evidence, persistently seeking the truth, utilizing available legal channels, and sometimes employing unconventional but lawful strategies, a single determined individual, especially when supported by a community finally awakening to injustice, can successfully reclaim what is rightfully theirs and ultimately hold those who abuse their power accountable. Furthermore, it vividly illustrates the profound importance of community solidarity and demonstrates how shared grievances and collective action can unite people to challenge wrongdoing and bring about truly positive, lasting change. What would you have done if faced with a similar situation? Do you have any experiences with HOA conflicts? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments section below. And if you found this story compelling and want to hear more narratives about standing up for what's right, please consider subscribing to the channel.